Minecraft horror story, The Smile in the Cave. Steve heard his own voice call from the tunnel before he had said a word. "There is iron down here," the voice said. It came from beyond the last torch, where the cave bent around a wall of black stone. The words were clear, calm, and close enough to sound as if another player stood only a few blocks away. Steve stopped swinging his pickaxe. A crack ran through the iron ore in front of him, but the block did not break. He held still and listened. Water dripped somewhere below. A bat clicked in the dark. Then his voice came again. "Steve, bring another torch." His name sounded wrong when spoken in his own voice. The second word was too slow. The last word fell into a deep whisper. Steve stepped back. He had entered the cave alone. Rowan was cutting spruce trees near the base, and Mara was repairing the wheat farm beside the village. No one else had joined their world that day. Steve opened the player list anyway. 3 names appeared: Steve, Rowan, Mara. Nothing more. He placed a torch on the floor. Its light reached the bend and showed part of a stone wall, a patch of coal, and 2 long black fingers curling out from behind the corner. Steve did not move. The fingers slowly pulled away. He raised his shield and walked toward the bend. Every part of him told him to run, but the cave was only 30 blocks below their house. If a new mob had spawned there, he needed to know what it was. He placed another torch. The flame pushed the dark back and showed an empty passage. Then something smiled at him from the ceiling. It clung upside down above the torch. It wore a torn blue shirt and dark purple trousers, like a ruined copy of Steve's own skin. Its arms were far too long. They folded against the stone like the legs of a spider. Its face was black except for 2 deep eye holes and a white mouth packed with square teeth. The smile stretched from one side of its head to the other. For 1 second, Steve could only stare. The creature opened its mouth wider. "There is iron down here," it said in his voice. Steve ran. Stone rushed past on both sides. He struck the wall twice as he tried to turn through the narrow tunnel. Behind him, long hands slapped against the floor and ceiling. The creature did not run like a player. It pulled itself forward with its arms while its legs scraped behind it. Each movement made a hard, fast beat that followed Steve toward the mine entrance. He dropped a cobblestone block behind him. Then another. The tunnel filled. A long arm shot through the final gap before the 3rd block could settle. Black fingers opened beside his face. Steve struck them with his iron pickaxe. The arm snapped back. A cry came through the wall, but it was not the creature's cry. It sounded like Rowan. "Help me, Steve, please." Steve placed the last block and climbed the ladder without looking down. He reached the trapdoor inside their storage room and slammed it shut. Rowan stood beside a row of chests with an oak log in his hand. Mara was at the furnace, turning raw copper into ingots. Both stared at Steve's empty face and the shield shaking in his hand. "What happened?" Rowan asked. Steve placed 2 blocks over the trapdoor. He checked the player list again before answering. "Something is in the mine." Mara took her sword from the wall. "A creeper!" It spoke. Rowan gave a nervous laugh. "A witch can make sounds." It used my voice. The room became quiet. Steve told them what he had seen. He described the blue shirt, the stretched arms, the dark face, and the smile. He told them how it had called him using words he had spoken earlier that morning. Rowan stopped smiling. Mara looked at the covered trapdoor. "You said it cried like me?" Rowan asked. Steve nodded. "I never went near the mine today." They spent the rest of the afternoon sealing every cave opening they knew about. Mara placed iron doors at the lower stairs. Rowan hung lanterns along the outside wall and cut down the spruce trees closest to the house. Steve filled the mine shaft with stone until he could no longer hear the tapping below. At sunset, the three of them stood on the roof. Their base sat on a low hill above a river. A village lay across the water, with farms on one side and dark woods on the other. The place had always felt safe. Torches covered the paths. Iron golems walked between the houses. Their own wall was 3 blocks high and topped with lanterns. Nothing moved beyond the light. "Maybe it cannot come above ground," Rowan said. Mara looked toward the forest. "Maybe it does not need to." That night, no one slept. Steve watched the mine room while the others checked the wall. Near midnight, a sound came from beneath the floor. Tap, tap, tap. It moved slowly from the storage room toward the kitchen. Steve followed it with his sword ready. The sound passed under the furnace, crossed beneath the long table, and stopped under Mara's chair. Mara stepped away. The three of them stared at the floor. Then Steve's voice spoke from below. "Something is in the mine." The words were followed by a soft laugh. Mara broke one plank. There was solid dirt beneath it. Rowan broke the next. More dirt. They tore up half the floor and found no tunnel, no gap, and no mob. The tapping began again behind them, this time inside the wall. They turned together. A black hand slipped past the kitchen window and pulled a torch from the outside of the house. Darkness covered the glass. Something tall moved beyond it. Rowan fired an arrow through the window. The glass broke. The arrow vanished into the night. For the rest of the dark hours, they heard footsteps circle the house. Sometimes the steps sounded heavy, like an iron golem. Sometimes they were the soft steps of a player on grass. Once they heard a wolf scratch at the front door. When Steve looked through the spyglass, he saw nothing outside. Just before dawn, a voice came from the roof. It was Mara's voice. "Let me inside." Mara was standing beside Steve. The thing above them dragged one finger across the wooden blocks. It made the same sound again and again until sunlight reached the windows. Then it stopped. They found marks on the roof after sunrise. 4 deep lines crossed the planks from the chimney to the ladder. A torch had been placed at the end of the marks. It was one of Steve's torches from the cave, still burning. Beside it lay an iron ore block. Steve picked up the ore with iron tongs and placed it in an empty chest. The block looked normal, but when Mara broke it open, there was no raw iron inside. A folded piece of paper fell onto the floor instead. 3 rough faces had been drawn on it with charcoal. Steve, Rowan, and Mara stood in a line. A 4th shape stood behind them, with arms reaching over all 3 heads. Under the picture were 4 uneven words. "I can stand here." Rowan looked over his shoulder, even though the roof was bright with morning sun. Mara checked the paper for redstone or a hidden map. There was nothing. The creature had made it only to frighten them, which meant it understood more than hunting. It understood messages. It understood that fear could force people to make mistakes. Steve walked the edge of the roof and studied the ground. The long marks ended at the south wall, but there were no tracks below. He climbed down and searched the grass. Near the river, one patch of dirt had been placed where sand should have been. He broke it and found a narrow hole under the bank. The passage ran beneath the water. It was only 1 block high and too tight to enter without crawling. Steve used a piston to push a glass block into the side so they could see inside. The tunnel continued toward the village, then split. One path turned back under their house. The other went toward the forest. Mara placed a minecart with a chest at the entrance. Inside it, she put a clock, a compass, and a book with one line, "We see you too." She connected the cart to a tripwire bell. If anything moved it, they would know. The bell rang before noon. They rushed to the river. The minecart remained in place, but the chest was open. The clock and compass were gone. The book held a new line beneath Mara's message. "No, you do not." The ink was still wet. Steve looked through the glass window into the tunnel. Far under the river, 2 pale eyes looked back. The smile appeared a moment later, pressed flat against the glass. Mara activated the piston. A stone block drove forward, but the creature vanished before it could be crushed. The compass flew out of the hole and landed at Steve's feet. Its needle spun without stopping. The stolen clock was never returned. From then on, time near the base began to feel wrong. Bells rang before sunset, even when no villager touched them. Clocks inside chests showed midnight during the day. Once, Steve watched the sun drop by several blocks, rise again, and then return to its proper place. Rowan believed the creature was moving their clocks and hiding the sky with smoke. But Steve had seen no smoke. The Mimesser was teaching them not to trust light, time, or sound. They followed the forest branch of the tunnel from above. Every 10 blocks, Steve dug down until he found the hollow space, marked it, and filled the gap with gravel. The path ended near a ruined portal deep among the spruce trees. The portal had been there before they built the village. Its crying obsidian blocks stood around a broken frame, and red nether plants grew through the grass. Now a wall of dirt covered one side. Someone had built a small room behind it. Inside, Steve found copies of their tools. Wooden shapes had been cut into the rough forms of swords, pickaxes, and bows. A square pumpkin wore an iron helmet like Rowan's. A hay bale had been dressed in Mara's leather coat. In the corner stood a full copy of Steve made from blue wool, purple wool, and a carved head. The smile cut into that head was too wide. Mara found lines on the floor showing paths through their base. Each bed, door, window, and chest had been marked. The creature had planned routes to reach them while they slept. One route ended at the chimney, another ended beneath Mara's chair. Rowan stepped back from the map and touched something hanging from a hook. It was the missing clock. The hands pointed to sunset. Outside, full daylight vanished. Darkness covered the spruce trees in a single blink. Zombies groaned between the trunks. The moon stood over the ruined portal. Rowan reached for a torch, but Mara stopped him. "It cannot move the sun," she said. "This is not real." A row of white smiles appeared in the forest. There were at least 12 of them, floating between the trees. Some were low to the ground, others hung high in the leaves. Steve raised his shield. The smiles rushed closer. Mara threw a torch at the nearest one. It struck a painted plank. All 12 smiles were simple wooden signs pulled along wires. The zombies were voice sounds from note blocks hidden underground. Above the false dark, black wool had been stretched between the treetops like a roof. The Mimicer had built a stage around them. Then the real creature dropped behind Rowan. Steve saw its long arm rise. He pushed Rowan aside and took the hit on his shield. Wood cracked. Mara cut one of the wires holding the black wool. Sunlight poured through the opening. The Mimicer covered its face and crawled into the ruined portal room. Steve followed, but the room was empty. A 2-block hole opened behind the wool figure of Steve. It led straight down. They burned the room and the false night as the black wool caught fire. Every painted smile curled and vanished. The real Mimicer called from the deep hole in Mara's voice. "This is not real." It laughed all the way back to the hill. Rowan wanted to leave the base at once. Mara wanted to find out what the creature could do before it followed them somewhere with fewer walls. Steve said nothing for a long time. He looked at the ore block and remembered the white smile above the cave torch. "It brought this here to show us it knows the way up," he said. "If we run without a plan, it will hunt us in the open." Mara agreed. She had built most of their redstone machines and knew how to make traps. They would watch it from a safe place, learn its limits, and then force it back underground. Rowan did not like the idea, but he stayed. Their first test used a sheep in a fenced pen beyond the wall. Mara placed redstone lamps around the pen and connected them to levers on the roof. Steve and Rowan watched with spyglasses. At sunset, the forest filled with the normal sounds of zombies and skeletons. A creeper crossed the river and burned when morning came. The creature did not appear. On the second night, Rowan heard his name from the trees. "Rowan," a weak voice called. "I found diamonds." It sounded like Steve. Steve was lying flat on the roof beside him. The voice moved closer. "Come help me carry them." A shape stood between 2 spruce trunks. At first it looked like Steve. The same blue shirt, the same square head, the same dark hair. Then it stepped into the moonlight and unfolded. Its knees rose above the bushes. Its arms hung almost to the ground. The head tilted sideways, and the smile opened. Mara pulled the lever. Every redstone lamp flashed on. The creature dropped onto all fours. Its body shook as if the light hurt, but it did not flee. It stared at Rowan. The empty eyes grew pale for a moment, then it vanished. Not ran, not jumped, vanished. The fence gate opened by itself. The sheep screamed once. Long tracks appeared in the grass, one after another, moving through the pen while nothing could be seen. Steve fired arrows at the tracks. One struck something and stopped in the air. Dark drops fell beneath it. The creature became visible again beside the wall. It held the arrow in its mouth. "Come help me," it said. Then it climbed the outside of the wall without slowing. Its fingers pushed into the stone gaps, and its feet hung loose below it. Rowan backed away from the edge. Mara pulled a second lever. Dispensers fired burning arrows across the top of the wall. The creature moved faster than the flames. It slipped between 2 shots, flattened its body, and crawled through a 1-block space under the roof rail. Its head entered first. The smile scraped against the stone on both sides. Steve struck it with his sword. The hit threw it back over the wall. It fell into the grass, twisted in a way no player could, and ran on its hands toward the forest. The burning arrows followed it between the trees, For several seconds, the three friends heard their own voices laughing in the dark. The sheep was gone. Only the lead remained tied in a neat knot around the fence post. They learned three things. Bright light made the creature easier to see, but it did not stop it. It could disappear for a few seconds, and one block of space was enough for it to enter. They spent the next day closing every gap in the base. Slabs came off the windows, trapdoors came off the roof, the chimney was filled with stone. They placed bells in the halls and pressure plates around the wall. Mara made a row of lamps that could light the whole yard at once. Steve went to the village library. The oldest librarian had traded maps with them for months. When Steve showed him a rough drawing of the creature, the villager dropped the paper. He hurried to a back shelf and removed a written book. Its cover had no title. Most pages were empty, but the first few held notes written by someone named Oren. The notes were many years old. Oren had built a mine under the same hill before the village existed. He wrote about a voice that followed his crew through the caves. It copied the sound of picks, footsteps, and people calling from other tunnels. At first they thought the caves made strange echoes. Then one miner followed his wife's voice into a narrow crack. His wife was at home more than 1,000 blocks away. The miner never came back. Oren called the creature the Immerse because it never made a sound of its own. It stole every cry, laugh, and word from something else. He wrote that it watched for many nights before it attacked. The longer it watched, the better it learned. It could copy a voice after hearing only one sentence. It could copy habits after watching a player work. It could even place simple blocks. The final note was short. It is not trying to sound like us. It is trying to become someone we will let inside. On the back page, Oren had drawn a map of the cave. A red line led from the old mine to a round chamber far below the hill. Beside the chamber, he had written 5 words. Do not look at the smile. Steve brought the book home. Rowan read the last page twice. Why would looking at it matter? He asked. Mara pointed to the first notes. It learns by watching. Maybe we teach it every time we face it. Steve remembered how the pale shapes inside its eyes had become brighter when it stared at Rowan. He thought about the copies of their voices. Each one had been clearer than the last. That evening they made a rule. No one would answer a voice unless they could see the speaker. No one would open a door without a code. The code was changed every night and written on paper so the creature could not hear them say it. The first code was red mushroom. At midnight, someone knocked on the north door. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 more. Steve, Rowan called from outside. I fell off the wall. Open up. Steve looked across the room. Rowan was sleeping in a chair near the furnace. The knock came again. What is the code? Mara asked. Silence. Then the voice answered, red mushroom. All 3 stared at the paper on the table. They had never spoken the words. Something slid beneath the door. A thin black finger moved across the floor, reached the paper, and tapped the written code. Mara brought her axe down. The finger pulled away before the blade hit. From the other side came her own voice. It reads, the lamps outside died in a line. First the north wall, then the east, then the yard. Darkness moved toward the house, 1 redstone lamp at a time. Steve rang the village bell. Iron golems gathered near the path. Zombies groaned beyond the farms. The Immerse began knocking on every door at once. The sound came from the house, the stable, the storage shed, and the village across the river. Dozens of fists seemed to strike wood in the same pattern. 3 knocks, a pause, 3 knocks. Villagers opened their homes in panic. Steve saw one run into the road. A tall shape rose behind him, but when the golem turned, the shape was gone. Another villager screamed near the river. Then the scream came from the roof, then from under the bridge. The creature was making the whole village hear things that were not there. Mara fired a flare from a dispenser. A burning arrow sailed high over the yard. For one bright second, Steve saw the Mimosar crouched on the village bell, its long arms wrapped around the wooden frame, its head turned toward him. The mouth did not smile. It wore Rowan's face. The copy was almost perfect, but its eyes were black and its jaw hung too low. When the burning arrow fell, the face opened into the wide white grin. The Mimosar jumped from the bell and dropped into a well. Steve, Mara, and the real Rowan crossed the bridge at dawn. The well held water only 4 blocks deep. A hole had been broken through one side beneath the surface. The tunnel beyond it led back under the hill. The Mimosar had not climbed out of Steve's mine. It had dug into the village, watched them through the wells and floors, and built paths beneath every place they thought was safe. Mara lowered a lantern into the hole. The light showed walls covered in scratches. Mixed among them were small drawings, a square house, 3 figures on a roof, a fenced sheep, a red mushroom. It had been recording them. The rescued villager could not tell them what waited deeper in the nest, so Mara gave him paper. His hands shook as he drew. First he made a long tunnel, then a circle for the large cave. He marked several cages beside a patch of water. Last, he drew the Mimosar standing over a bed. In the bed was another tall figure. The villager pointed at Steve, then at the figure in the drawing. He placed both hands against his chest and pulled them apart as if opening a shirt. After that, he covered his face. "Another Steve?" Rowan asked. The villager nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again. He did not have words for what he had seen. Steve studied the drawing. The creature wore his clothes because something below wore them first. Oren's book said it was trying to become someone they would let inside. Perhaps it was not copying Steve only because Steve was near. Perhaps it had copied a different player long ago and never stopped wearing him. They took the villager to the surface before Steve climbed out. He heard a bell far below. One clear ring traveled through the tunnel. The village bell above answered. No one had touched it. During the next night, the Mimosar stopped hiding. It stood beyond the wheat farm at sunset, tall enough to see over the fence. When Steve aimed a bow, it crouched behind the crops. A few minutes later, it appeared beside the church. Then it stood on a hill across the river, holding a spyglass to one pale eye. It was using Steve's stolen spyglass. Steve watched it from the wall. The creature copied every move. When Steve raised his left arm, it raised its left arm. When he stepped back, it stepped back. When he lowered the bow, it lowered the spyglass. Mara told Steve to walk toward the south tower while Rowan stayed out of sight. The Mimosar followed Steve's movement from the distant hill. Rowan slipped through a rear gate, crossed the river under the bridge, and circled behind it. Steve lifted both arms. The creature did the same. Rowan fired. The arrow struck the Mimosar between the shoulders. It bent forward but did not fall. Its head turned all the way around while its body remained facing Steve. The smile opened at Rowan. Then it spoke in Rowan's voice. "Now, Skeletons rose from pits hidden along the hill. The Mimicer had trapped them behind dirt walls and opened the walls with redstone. Arrows flew from every side. Rowan ran for the river. Steve and Mara fired from the base while the creature crawled after him through the grass. Rowan reached the water a few blocks ahead of it. He jumped. The Mimicer stopped at the bank. It stared at the river as if afraid to enter. Rowan swam under the bridge. The creature walked along the edge, matching his speed. It tried one step into the water, pulled back, and screamed with a voice like hot metal in rain. That was the first sound they believed belonged to it. Mara opened the floodgates at the farm. Water rushed from the crop channels and spread across the bank. The Mimicer climbed a tree to escape. Steve shot the branch beneath it. The creature fell into the moving water and vanished in a cloud of black shapes. When it returned on the far bank, smoke rose from its skin. It fled into the forest. Water did not kill it, but it weakened whatever held its body together. That fact gave Steve the beginning of a plan. The underground map showed a lake beside the cages. Oren had drawn old piston marks around the round chamber. If those machines still worked, the cave itself might hold the weapon they needed. The Mimicer knew they had learned this. Before dawn, it placed the stolen spyglass outside Steve's door. The glass was filled with black water. A tiny white tooth floated inside. On the handle, one word had been cut into the wood. Come. Rowan wanted to burn the book, leave the village, and travel until the hill was beyond the loaded chunks. This time, Steve almost agreed. Then they found the first missing villager. He was alive inside a pocket under the well. His hands were tied with leads and dirt covered his robe. He could not speak. He only pointed deeper into the tunnel and shook his head. There were more villagers missing after the night of knocking. Steve could not leave them. They prepared for 2 days. Mara built helmet lamps from lanterns and iron, crude but bright. Rowan brewed night vision and healing potions. Steve made shields, diamond swords, and enough torches to fill every tunnel they found. They also made a new code system the Mimicer could not learn by listening or reading. Each person carried a different colored wool block hidden in a shulker box. If they became separated, they had to place the block where the others could see it. No voice would be trusted. Steve carried blue, Mara carried yellow, Rowan carried green. They entered through the well at noon. The tunnel was too smooth to be natural. It stayed 1 block high for long parts, forcing them to crawl. Steve understood why Oren's crew had struggled. The Mimicer could move through these gaps at full speed. Players could not. The walls held things taken from the village: doors, beds, bells, crop blocks. A child villager's red bed had been placed on the ceiling. Lanterns hung upside down but were not lit. The tunnel felt less like a nest and more like a poor copy of their home. They found voices trapped in it. When Steve touched a stone block, it whispered, "Good morning." When Rowan passed a hanging door, the wood said, "I found diamonds." A barrel near Mara laughed in her voice. The sounds came from hidden note blocks and small redstone parts. The Mimicer had built a machine from stolen pieces. Pressure plates beneath the dirt played the voices when anyone passed. It wanted them to follow the wrong sound. Mara broke every wire she saw. Beyond the voice machine, the tunnel divided into rooms built from stolen blocks. One room copied the village library, but every shelf held blank books. One copied the inside of their base. though the walls were only 2 blocks high and the beds were made from stone. A third copied the farm. Dirt rows crossed the floor, and bones had been planted where wheat should grow. At the end stood a copy of Steve's bedroom. His blue bed rested beneath a square window. A chest sat at its foot. On the wall, a wooden sword hung in the same place as the diamond sword at home. The details were so close that Steve could tell the creature had watched him through the real window for many nights. Rowan opened the chest with a long stick. Inside were books filled with Steve's words. Some pages held simple lines. "I need more wood." "The farm is ready. Close the gate." Other pages copied whole talks the friends had shared. The creature had written down their jokes, their plans, and the quiet things they said when they believed no one else could hear. One book held nothing but the different ways Steve had spoken Rowan's name. Mara found a newer book. Its first page described the three of them entering through the well. The next told how they found the voice machine. The third said they entered the copied bedroom and opened the chest. The final page was blank, except for a wet line of ink. Rowan closes the door. The stone door slammed behind them. Rowan had not touched it. Water began pouring through holes in the ceiling. Steve remembered how the creature had feared the river and felt a brief hope. Then he smelled the water. It was thick, black, and warm. It clung to their armor like oil. Mara tried the door. Hidden pistons held it shut. Rowan broke the copied bed and found a 1-block hole beneath it. A voice came from the gap. "This way," Steve's voice said. They ignored it. The black water reached their knees. Pale mouths opened across its surface, forming from bubbles. Each mouth repeated, "This way," while the level climbed. Steve searched the walls. The fake window showed a painted sunrise, but air moved around one edge. He broke it with his pickaxe. Behind the painting was a red stone control space. Mara crawled inside and cut the power to the door. The pistons released. Rowan pulled it open. Clear water from a bucket washed the black fluid away as they escaped. The pale mouths broke apart. Something under the fake bed struck the floor hard enough to crack stone. They sealed the copied bedroom from outside. "It wrote what we would do before we did it," Rowan said. "No," Mara answered. "It wrote what it wanted us to do. It knew we would read the page and watch you. While we watched you, it closed the door." Steve understood the trap. The Immerse did not need to know the future. It only needed to tell frightened people where to look. From that point, they stopped reading its signs aloud. They broke every copied room and marked the true path with torches under glass. If the creature removed a torch, the glass would remain. If it copied the mark, the new block would not carry the small crack Mara made in each corner. The next room held 6 missing villagers tied beside a wall. Steve rushed forward, but Mara caught his arm. None of the villagers moved, their eyes were open and their faces looked real. Rowan rolled a snowball across the floor. The nearest villager opened his mouth. The white smile split his head, and the whole shape fell apart into painted wood. All 6 were dolls. The Immerse dropped behind them and blocked the way back. It stood upright in the narrow hall, shoulders bent under the ceiling. 6 villager voices came from its mouth. "Help us." Steve threw clear water from his bucket. The creature moved sideways and climbed the wall. Mara placed a torch beneath it. Rowan fired at its hands. The Immerse vanished, but its long shadow remained in the torchlight. The shadow crossed the ceiling toward Mara. Steve followed the shadow and raised his shield. An invisible hit struck him with enough force to crack the edge. Mara poured water across the ceiling from a gap above. The Mimicer returned at once, hanging in the stream. Steam and dark smoke came from its arms. It fell among the wooden villagers. Rowan lit them with a fire charge. Flames trapped the creature between clear water and fire. For several seconds it could not vanish. Steve saw the black lines under its torn shirt pulling toward a deeper passage, as if roots inside the cave were trying to drag it home. The creature chose the fire. It ran through the burning dolls, struck the wall, and squeezed into a crack no player could use. One real villager remained behind the false wall. They freed him, gave him a healing potion, and sent him back toward the well with a trail of glass-marked torches. He carried yellow wool so anyone above would know Mara had sent him. As he left, the Mimicer called after him in Mara's voice. "Turn around." The villager kept walking. The copied voice became angry, then sad, then gentle. It used the sounds of his family. It rang the village bell. It cried like a child. The villager never looked back. Neither did Steve. The tunnel reached an old mine shaft. Cobwebs crossed broken rails. Oran's supports still stood under the hill, dark oak worn almost black. Signs with faded arrows pointed toward an exit that had collapsed long ago. On one post, fresh words had been cut into the wood. "Steve, bring another torque." Steve felt Rowan touch his shoulder. He turned too quickly and raised his sword. Rowan held up both hands, then placed green wool on the rail. It was him. They moved without speaking. At each crossing they placed torches on both walls. The light pushed far ahead, leaving fewer shadows. For a while the mine was quiet. Then Mara stopped. 3 passages opened in front of her. At the end of each stood Steve. One wore an iron helmet, one held a torch, one carried a shield. All 3 had their backs turned. The real Steve stood behind Mara. The copies spoke at the same time. "There is iron down here." Mara threw a splash potion into the crossing. Water broke over the 3 shapes. 2 vanished like smoke. The third bent backward until its head touched the floor, its arms unfolded. The Mimicer rushed them. Rowan fired first. His arrow struck its chest, but the creature kept coming. Steve blocked one long arm with his shield. The hit pushed him into the wall. Mara cut the other arm. Dark blood splashed across the rail. The Mimicer screamed in the voice of every villager at once. The helmet lamps flickered. For 3 seconds the creature vanished. Steve watched drops of blood appear on the floor. They moved around Rowan, crossed the wall and climbed onto the ceiling. He swung upward. His sword hit something hard. The creature returned above him, its face only a block away. The white smile filled his view. Inside its mouth, behind the rows of teeth, Steve saw faces. They were not real heads. They were moving shapes made from shadow, each one opening its mouth to make a stolen voice. A villager cried. A wolf barked. Rowan shouted for help. Mara called Steve's name. Beneath them all, a weaker voice begged in words Steve had not heard before. "Please stop me." Steve froze. The Mimicer could have bitten him. Instead, it held still. Its pale eyes stared down with a look that did not match the smile. Pain moved through them. For 1 second, Steve saw a trapped mind looking back. Then the dark in its face closed over the eyes, and the creature attacked. Mara struck the lamp on its head with her axe. Glass and flame burst across its face. The Mimicer fell. Rowan pulled Steve away, and the three ran down the left tunnel. They did not stop until they reached a bridge over a huge cave. The chamber below matched the round room on Oren's map. It was wider than the village and deep enough that their torchlight could not reach the floor. Stone columns rose through the dark. An underground lake shone far below. In the center, on a thin ledge, dozens of villagers sat behind iron bars. They were alive. Some lifted their heads when Steve called. Others did not move. A long path curved down the cave wall toward them. Every few blocks, a torch burned with a cold blue flame. At the far end of the chamber stood a second cage. Something human sat inside it. Steve used the spyglass. The figure wore the remains of a blue shirt. Its arms and legs were normal. Black lines spread across its skin from a wound in its chest. It looked like another version of Steve, older, weak, and barely alive. The figure raised his head. "Do not come down," he shouted. His voice was the weak voice Steve had heard inside the Mimicer's mouth. The Mimicer dropped from the ceiling behind the cage. Its long fingers reached through the bars and touched the prisoner's shoulders. The prisoner cried out. The creature copied the cry at the same time, perfect in every detail. Steve understood. The Mimicer was not simply using sounds it remembered. The trapped player was connected to it. Black growths ran from the creature's body into cracks in the stone, then through the cage floor. The cave itself was part of it, a nest built around the player it had changed. Oren's warning had been right. Looking at the smile showed the creature new faces and new fear, but the smile also hid the person still inside it. Mara pointed to the ledge over the cages. Redstone dust crossed the stone. The old miners had built a line of pistons around the chamber. At the top of the cave, cracked gravel held back the underground lake. Oren had prepared a way to flood the nest but had never used it. Mara showed Steve a lever from her pack. Their plan changed. Rowan would free the villagers. Mara would repair the redstone line. Steve would draw the Mimicer away from both. They still would not trust voices. They placed their wool blocks on the bridge one last time and split up. Steve ran along the high path, striking his shield with his sword. The sound rang through the cave. "You wanted my voice," he shouted. "Come and take it." The Mimicer turned from the cage. Its head tilted. Steve ran. The creature climbed a column instead of using the path. Its long body moved across the wall, disappearing behind stone and returning closer each time the cave went dark. Steve placed torches as he ran, but hands reached from cracks and pulled them away. Behind him, the creature repeated his challenge in a dozen voices. "Come and take it." He reached an abandoned rail line above the lake and pushed a minecart onto it. The track curved around the chamber toward Oren's broken camp. Steve jumped in. The cart rolled down the slope. The Mimicer landed on the rail behind him. For a moment, it stood upright. It looked like a tall, ruined Steve waiting at a station. Then it dropped to all fours and chased the cart. Steve passed Rowan on the lower ledge. Rowan had opened the first cage and was leading villagers toward a stairway. He placed green wool on the ground. Steve raised his blue block in reply. The Mimicer saw the signal. It tore green wool from Rowan's open shulker box as it passed. Steve's stomach turned. Their only safe code had just been stolen. The cart struck a missing rail and threw him onto Oren's camp platform. Old chests broke under his weight. The Mimicry stopped at the edge of the light. It held up the green wool. "Steve," Rowan's voice called from behind it. "I need help." The real Rowan was too far away to hear. Steve backed into the camp. Faded signs covered the walls. One showed a drawing of the Mimicry with lines leading from its body into the cave. Another described the black parasite that had entered Oren's friend through a cut while they mined near the lake. It had grown inside him, stretched him, and used his nerves like redstone wire. The friend stayed awake inside the changed body. He could feel every attack but could not stop it. Fire had slowed the growth. Water had forced it out of cracks. Oren believed enough water could break its hold for a short time. Steve looked at the lake above the gravel shelf. Mara was still repairing the line. The Mimicry stepped into the camp. It placed the green wool on the floor. "It is me," Rowan's voice said. Steve looked at its feet. The legs were normal length. The arms stopped at its sides. The face was hidden by an iron helmet. It had folded itself into Rowan's shape. "Show me your face," Steve said. The figure raised both hands and removed the helmet. Rowan's face looked back. "Please," it said. "The thing is behind me." Steve almost believed it. The skin, clothes, and frightened eyes were right. Then the mouth smiled and the teeth went on too far. Steve threw a fire charge. The blast filled the camp. The Mimicry unfolded inside the flame, arms striking the walls as its body grew. Steve jumped through a broken doorway and climbed the rail supports. Burning hands grabbed at his boots. One caught him and pulled. He cut the fingers with his sword. The creature fell into the camp and vanished before it hit the floor. Steve could no longer see the blood. Fire covered the platform. Smoke hid the rail. He climbed toward Mara, following the redstone line around the cave. "Steve," Mara shouted from above, "I fixed it." He looked up. Mara stood beside the main piston with yellow wool in her hand. The laver was ready. Something invisible breathed beside Steve's ear. "I fixed it," the same voice whispered. Steve swung. His sword passed through empty air. A black hand appeared around his wrist. The Mimicry became visible behind him, hanging from the wall with one arm. Its mouth opened beside his head. "Please stop me," the trapped player begged from deep inside it. Steve drove a torch into the creature's eye. The hand released him. The Mimicry screamed and struck the support. Wood broke. Steve fell onto the narrow path below. His sword slid toward the edge and vanished into the lake. Mara pulled the lever. Pistons fired around the chamber. Gravel dropped from the high shelf. For one quiet second, nothing happened. Then the underground lake came through the wall. Water hit the cave like a moving mountain. It tore torches from stone, lifted rails, and swept the burning camp into the dark. Steve held a fence post as the flood covered the path. The Mimicry tried to climb, but black growths pulled from the cracks behind it. They snapped one by one. The creature screamed in hundreds of voices. The sound became Steve, Rowan, Mara, villagers, wolves, zombies, and crying people none of them knew. Under every stolen sound, the weak player kept saying the same words. "Now, please, now." The Mimicry fell into the water. Its back split open. A black shape pulled away from the blue shirt. It looked like smoke mixed with long, wet roots. For the first time, the body beneath it became normal. The arms shortened, the smile closed. The trapped player fell free, and reached for the ledge. Steve caught his hand. The black parasite moved through the water toward them. It had no face now, but mouths opened along its body, each one still speaking. A long piece wrapped around Steve's boot. Cold pain climbed his leg. Black lines appeared beneath his skin. Mara threw a splash potion of healing. The glass broke against Steve's chest. Light passed through him and the black lines stopped at his knee. Rowan arrived with 2 iron golems from the freed cage. The golems struck the water again and again, driving the parasite toward the broken camp. Steve pulled the old player onto the ledge. The man opened his eyes. "Burn the center," he whispered. Mara fired a flaming arrow into the camp. The old mine's supports caught at once. Fire spread across coal dust, wool, and dry wood. The parasite rushed back toward the trapped player, but the flood carried it into the flames. Every mouth opened. The white smile appeared in the fire one last time. Then the cave roof began to fall. Rowan led the villagers up the stairway. Mara supported the weak player. Steve stayed behind them with a shield, blocking falling stone. The water rose to his chest. The black line in his leg burned with every step. They reached the mine shaft as the round chamber closed behind them. A stone column fell across the tunnel. Water burst through the gaps. The last thing Steve heard from the cave was his own voice. "There is iron down here." Then the passage collapsed. They climbed out through the village well just before sunset. 23 villagers returned with them. The iron golems did not. The weak player lived long enough to give them his name, but his voice was so quiet that only Steve heard it. He had been Oren's friend, trapped beneath the hill for years while the parasite used his body to hunt. When night came, he closed his eyes beside the village bell and did not open them again. They buried him under an oak tree where the cave could not touch him. For the next week, Mara watched the black marks in Steve's leg. They did not spread, healing potions made them fade, but they never vanished. Steve could still feel a cold pull in the scars whenever he stood above a cave. Rowan destroyed every tunnel under the base. Mara filled the well and moved the redstone lamps to the village walls. Together they left the hill and built a new home on a bright plain, far from deep stone. They did not mine below level 0. They did not follow voices in the dark. No door opened unless the person outside could be seen in full light. Months passed without a sign of the Mimisser. Then, during a storm, Steve went into the new storage room for coal. Thunder shook the roof. Every lantern went dark for 1 second. In that second, he heard tapping beneath the floor. Tap, tap, tap. The lanterns came back. The room was empty. Steve looked down at his leg. The black scars had spread to his ankle. Across the room, a polished block of copper showed his reflection. Steve stood still, his mouth closed, his eyes wide. The reflection smiled. Its mouth stretched from one side of his face to the other. Steve stepped away from the copper. The smiling reflection did not move. It lifted one long black finger to its lips. From somewhere below the new house, Steve's voice whispered through the floor. "Bring another torch."